Yes.
Hello, and welcome to the July 2022 National 8A Association webinar. I'm Rochelle Shapiro, the Director of Strategic Planning for the National 8A Association. The National 8A Association is a nonprofit with a mission to provide education and guidance for all aspiring, current, and graduate 8As. We're also proud to work with all types of minority small businesses, HubZone, veteran-owned, women-owned, JVs, agencies, large primes, and industry professionals. Before I begin, I'd like to note that the webinar is being recorded and all presentation materials will be posted on the website post-event. If you would like to ask a question, please use the chat box and select everyone, or email us at events@national8aassociation.org. Don't be shy, add those questions. I'd like to now welcome today's speaker, Matthew Schoonover, who is the managing member of Schoonover and Moriarty, to talk us through the inflation situation, crunch cost for GovCon. Welcome, Matthew.
Thanks so much, Rochelle. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so happy to join today to discuss what I think is perhaps one of the most pressing topics dealing with government contractors right now, and that is how to address the increased cost or the difficult cost environment that every business is in, but certainly small businesses. And here at our practice at Schoonover and Moriarty, we work with small business federal government contractors on a bevy of issues that they face in working with Uncle Sam. And this right now, I will say, probably is the most common question that I get from small business clients and prospective clients, and that is, how can they help share or ease this burden of increased costs with the federal government? And today I hope to take just a little bit of time to walk through some tips. None of them, I will say, and Rochelle and I were talking about this before the event started. Unfortunately, there is no silver bullet for dealing with crunched costs or inflated costs in the current environment. A lot of it is going to have to do with your relationship, quite frankly, with the contracting officer and the ability to show perhaps other issues impacting the contract. But nonetheless, I hope today's presentation gives you some ideas on how to deal with what is a very, very important issue right now for government contractors. And it's no surprise to anybody, no matter where you are located or what industry you are in, we are all facing higher costs and inflationary pressures. And these are particularly acute in my mind for small businesses because, quite frankly, in my experience, small businesses tend to work under what are called fixed price contracts. And under fixed price contracts, essentially the contractor bears all of the risk and the reward for controlling its costs. That is, the contractor is going to receive a sum certain under the contract for the work that it performs. And to the extent the contractor is able to minimize its costs, it will maximize its profit under those fixed price contracts. But here we're seeing a very, very different environment from labor costs, from material costs, from shipping costs, just about everything that is impacting or plays into a federal government contract, those costs are increasing in a lot of ways. And when costs increase, fixed price contracts keep the risk on the contractor. Essentially, under a fixed price contract, if costs increase, it is up to the contractor to bear those risks or to bear that cost increase itself. A fixed price contract under the FAR is not subject to any adjustment based on the contractor's cost experience in performing the contract. If costs happen to rise during performance in a manner that makes the contract less profitable, the government's general approach under a fixed price contract is to say, well, too bad, so sad, contractor, that one's on you. these contracts incentivize you to perform the contract as effectively and efficiently as you can. But unfortunately, here, all of those issues are, quite frankly, outside of the contractor's control. And part of the problem that we see is sometimes these contracts are negotiated years in advance. That is, under most services contracts, odds are it's a 5-year period of performance. And if you bid your contract 3 or 4 years ago, there would have been no way to foresee the current inflationary pressures that all parties are dealing with right now. And so, in a lot of ways, this is very, very hard for contractors to determine and plan for under fixed price contracts. And here, this is just an illustration from the Government Accountability Office. I pulled it from one of their reports. But this illustration, I think, does a very good job on explaining the 3 basic types of contracts that the government offers. And we have fixed price contracts on the left, which, as I talked about, those are, or those place the risk, the cost risks on the contractor. But there are 2 other types of contracts where the government is going to bear those risks. And those are under straight cost reimbursable contracts or time and materials contracts. And under each of those types of contracts, the government accepts additional risks regarding those increased costs. We're not really going to talk about those contracts today, because under a cost reimbursable or a time and material contract, in theory, it should be easier for a contractor to recover some of its costs associated with inflationary pressures. Here today, we're going to be talking about really the fixed price concept, or the firm fixed price concept, which, again, in my experience, tends to be really what a lot of small business contractors perform under. So part of the reason why we're talking about this today, well, it's been a huge issue, as I mentioned, huge enough that recently the Department of Defense actually published guidance for its contracting officers in dealing with inflationary pressures under their contracts. The Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, on May 25th, published a memorandum called Guidance on Inflation and Economic Price Adjustments. And essentially, DoD said if contractors are performing under a fixed price contract, too bad, so sad. That is, DoD instructed contracting officers to not consider requests for equitable adjustments or claims based on increased costs associated with inflation. Contractors performing under firm fixed price contracts, quote, generally must bear the risk of cost increases under those contracts, including those due to inflation. The DoD just essentially reemphasized, here's what the FAR says, and there is no authority under the FAR for providing contractual relief to unanticipated costs caused by inflation. So here what DoD is saying is that if the only reason why a contractor's costs are increasing under a firm fixed price contract, then there is contractually no mechanism or no authority that would compel DoD to adjust those costs. However, DoD acknowledged that if there are changes to the contract that the government controls, then the contractor might be entitled to a request for equitable adjustment associated with those claims. Now, the memorandum also said, and I apologize, this is a bit cut off here down at the bottom, but the memorandum wasn't necessarily, hey, don't do this. I mean, it was in the context of fixed prices, but it wasn't necessarily just, well, we're going to wash our hands with this. Instead, what DoD said is it encouraged its contracting officials to determine whether particular contracts warrant the inclusion of an economic price adjustment clause. It encouraged them to say, to look at those requirements and see whether incorporating an EPA clause was worthwhile under the contract. It said that such clauses may be an appropriate tool to equitably balance the risk of inflation between the government and the contractor. So let's talk a little bit about these EPA or economic price adjustment clauses. And they sound great, but I really don't think that they're a cure-all. That is, the FAR kind of sets the basis for these cost adjustment clauses under FAR 16203 and 52.216-2. You can see there's various clauses there that might be incorporated in your contract. But essentially, what these clauses do is they allow for the price under the contract to be adjusted if certain thresholds are met, certain defined thresholds in the clauses. Say that there's an agreed upon or market price change of specific items under the clause, or if there's changes to the actual cost of labor or materials during performance, or sometimes these clauses will be tied to a specific index of labor or material. And if costs exceed a certain percentage based against that index, then those costs may be adjusted. However, this isn't, these clauses aren't necessarily a cure-all for issues under these contracts. They're going to limit, in most cases, the amount of recovery that a contractor may be entitled to. In some cases, the clauses prescribe only a maximum 10% recovery. That is, if costs exceed 10%, you're only going to recover up to 10%. But in any event, those requests have to be supported by verifiable data. It's not as if the contractor can just go to the government and say, boy, inflation's a bear right now. I'd really like for you to adjust my contract price by 5% or 9% based on the latest CPI numbers or what have you. No, you generally have to show, with regard to each item that you're claiming, to support the adjustment with verifiable data. In your contract, if it includes one of these clauses, generally will say what data needs to be provided in order to support this the economic price adjustment. Sometimes I will say also, these clauses only allow for adjustments every so often under the contract. That is, it's not as if in most cases you're going to be able to claim an EPA adjustment each month under the contract as, say, new data is released by the government, as the case may be. No, I recently reviewed one of these clauses, and each one may be different, but I recently reviewed one of these clauses that said you can request it once during the base period, once during option 2, and once during option 4. And so you have to kind of take a look. First of all, is this clause in your fixed price contract? And if so, what does this clause say? When are you allowed to ask for it, and under what circumstances? But I will also note that what the government giveth, the government may taketh away. That is, economic price adjustments are essentially equitable adjustments in the sense of the government, under the clause, may increase your price, but it also has the right to decrease your price as appropriate. And so know that these clauses, these economic price adjustment clauses, are not just a one-way ticket for the contractor to claim increased costs. If your contract has one of these clauses and we get in an experience where costs decrease, then the government may use that to recover essentially against the overall contract price against you as well. So certainly keep that in mind. EPA clauses may be appropriate under some circumstances. And certainly right now, you may want to have an EPA clause versus not having an EPA clause. But just know that there are, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword there if it is included in your contract, because the government would also have the right to recover for any decreases. So with that, just getting to the meat really of today's presentation, given where we are and given DoD's guidance, given the limitations on a fixed price contract, what can contractors do now to essentially minimize their risk under this contract or under fixed price contracts? And as I mentioned at the outset, unfortunately, I don't have a silver bullet. There's not, to my knowledge, a legal principle where somebody can, essentially file a claim against the government and say, notwithstanding the fact that it's a fixed price contract, you owe me for inflation because of this principle. I'm not aware of what that is, if there is one, and in fact, I don't think there is, because certainly DoD doesn't think there is, and that's not the nature of a fixed price contract. But how can we nonetheless, under the circumstances, try and minimize the pain to small businesses? And I have a few suggestions, and some of them may be more practical than others. And the first is always, consider inflation and potential cost increases when you're developing your price under a fixed price contract. Okay, I think everybody does. That's easier said than done, because of course we know that when small businesses are chasing contracts, of course one of the things that they're held up against is their price. The government's going to evaluate their price versus their competitors. Sometimes low price wins the game, especially under a low price technically acceptable proposal requirement. I will say the FAR now limits when the government can issue a low price, technically acceptable solicitation versus a best value solicitation. So if you're bidding on an LPTA, lowest price, technically acceptable procurement, and you think it may be better competitively to have it best value, consider asking the contracting officer to change that, or even filing a protest against the solicitation's terms, saying that it really should be best value. Again, last year, I think it was last year, the FAR was modified to really limit when the government can issue LPTA procurements. Now the presumption is, in most cases, procurement should be best value. And in that case, having the lowest price necessarily isn't determinative. That is, the government may pay a higher price under a best value procurement if the technical benefits warrant it, and I think the risks of unsuccessful performance warrant it as well. And so certainly think about, as you're bidding proposals, how you might mitigate some of these risks in the future. Now, again, that's not always possible. So try and negotiate an economic price adjustment clause in appropriate circumstances. Again, DoD instructed its contracting officers to consider adding economic price adjustment clauses in their contracts to share that risk. And so you may consider asking the contracting officer, to the extent there's not an EPA clause, to add one into the contract or the solicitation, excuse me, so that you can kind of hedge against that if you do need to adjust those prices. The third piece of advice I would have would be file a claim anyway. I mean, the worst they're going to do is say no, but more to the point, if you can point to either government changes in the scope of work, constructive changes in the scope of work, government-caused delays, you may be able to recover costs associated with the government's administration of that contract. And in some cases, those costs may allow you to recover increased costs. So consider how you might file a claim against the government or seek relief under the contract based on a different legal theory rather than just inflation. Note that in order to have a successful REA or a claim, you need to be able to back up what you're saying with contemporaneous documentation. And so I always tell my clients, make sure you're documenting your effort under the contract, that you're keeping contemporaneous notes about issues that you're facing, maybe delays that you're experiencing, changes that have been requested by the government, and make sure that you're keeping the contracting officer informed of those, particularly if you think it's going to impact your cost or your time to perform. Only contracting officers have the power to actually bind the government, that is, obligate the government to pay anything. Sometimes CORs and others involved in a contract want to make changes or have you do work in a way that is maybe differs from what the contract says. Document that, make sure you get it in approval from the contracting officer, because if you do have to file a claim or request for some type of compensation from the government, if it comes from somebody other than the contracting officer, you may face an uphill battle in that recovery. So consider ways that you might nonetheless recover those costs against the government under a contract. And then finally, this last one, I don't think hurts. I would say, political pressure by small businesses against or towards their representatives, I think is always helpful. I tell small businesses, if you're a small business federal contractor, you should probably be communicating with your representative fairly regularly, maybe once a year anyway, just to say, hey, the 8A program is important to me, or the Hub Zone program is important to me, or I'm able to employ this many people in your district due to these government contracts. I don't think there's enough of that goes around, and a lot of our represented folks don't necessarily know the impact that the federal dollars have in their district. And I always think that that's important to know. Recently, I had the chance to appear before Congress, and I did bring this up. I said, I do think that the government should do more to work particularly with small businesses in a case where inflation exceeds a certain percentage. That is, nobody could foresee this, really, when you look back, 3 years ago. And the idea that small businesses would be kept to these fixed prices based on things that were outside of everybody's understanding, I think is really problematic. Again, it's within the government's rights, but I think it's very short-sighted of them to do that. And the only way around that is going to be is if agencies face directives from Congress or from leaders that say, hey, you need to work with small businesses to do this. And so that one, the last suggestion is perhaps more of a longer term issue. It won't necessarily lead to any immediate changes or immediate relief. But again, I think it always does help to make sure your representatives know the importance of the work that you are doing and the impact of the government's inaction in cases like this. And so that's really kind of where we are today is, in a nutshell, yes, inflation is terrible, particularly for small businesses. Under a fixed price contract, small businesses really, may bear the brunt of that inflation, but there could be things to do certainly under future procurements and maybe even under current procurements that you might be able to at least offset some of that pain. Probably not cure all of it, but maybe offset some of it. And so, again, I wish I had a silver bullet. I'm not used to giving presentations where I say, ooh, but this is really one of those issues that everybody is facing right now, and hopefully under your contracts, you'd be able to get certainly some relief from these increased costs. And with that, I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that anybody might have about this topic or any others. My contact information is on the screen. If anybody would like to reach out after this and pose any other questions, I'm always happy to connect. Check us out, by the way, on govconbrief.com. We blog about a lot of small business federal contracting topics on GovCon Brief, and we certainly hope that those posts are educational and informative. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Otherwise, I certainly appreciate everybody's time today.
Matt, you're always a wealth of information with such a great spirit. So we really appreciate your time and really do hope that that cure-all silver bullet magically appears. And if it does, you're on the hook to circle back around.
I will scream it from the mountaintops as soon as I hear it.
Well, good. As you all heard it first here, he's going to let us know and update us all and keep us all abreast of all of the updates. Definitely check out GovCon Brief for more information as well. If any questions come up, I haven't seen anything come through the chat box, but you're always welcome to contact him directly, as he mentioned. And you can also always email us as well. If we don't know the answer, we will find it for you. As a reminder, this webinar recording will be available later on this week. It will be posted to our website along with all of our other past webinars that we have recorded. So use that as an educational resource as well. We have additional resources that are going to be coming up for upcoming conferences and partner events that we are supporting. And don't forget, if you're a member, you're eligible for discounted rates to all of those events. And I know Matthew can definitely attest that if you are planning your 2023 budgets, please make sure that you save the date to attend our 2023 National Small Business Conference. It's going to be back in New Orleans, February 13th through 15th in 2023. So celebrate Valentine's Day with us. It'll be a great time. And we know that you're not going to want to miss out on networking and all the education that will be happening back in NOLA, plus all the great food, of course. Early bird registrations will be launching soon. Keep abreast of all of those deadlines, including speaker opportunities that will be on our website as well as social media. And if you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out to our team. We'd love to help and be a resource of information for you. And thank you so much, Matthew, for your time again and for joining us. And we hope that everyone will come and see us next month. And in the meantime, be well and be safe. We'll talk soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a great day.